The increasing right wing populism that we see today is perhaps a response of the seeming failure of liberal democracy to deliver on its promises of an egalitarian society, cultural inclusivity, and economic prosperity. The sway of the right is not an isolated incident, but has been a defining feature of our political landscape in recent years, with far right parties and populist movements gaining grounds in countries across the globe. But will this trend continue, or is it simply a passing phase? Welcome to Geopolitics and Diplomacy as we explore the causes and consequences of the global shift to the right with our esteemed panel and what it means for the future of our world. We have with us Nicholas O'Shaughnessy. He's a professor of communication at Queen Mary University of London. He's also the author of books like Selling Hitler and Marketing the Third Reich. Danish Zahoor writes for the Geopolitics magazine, and his recent works around politics and semiotics and non-state actors and the end of the Westphalian world. We have we have with us Minnie Nair, who's a leading voice against the right wing in India and is also an author for the book The Fourth Passenger. Uh, Professor Nicholas, propaganda has been a significant tool for right wing political movements to shape public opinion and promote their ideology. How does propaganda intersect with other factors such as social identity, autocracy, and cognitive biases in shaping today's political views and beliefs, especially in the right wing movements?
Well, propaganda works in many ways, but it is fundamental to the rise of this global right because it's colonized social media. This is really the significant point. And it's used quite a variety of techniques in the West. It has used what we call weaponized irony. It has a kind of jokey mentality designed to appeal to very young men, and also allows the propagandists to deny the authenticity of what they appear to be saying. And these techniques are crudely humorous. For example, there was one which showed the entrance to Auschwitz, which said not Arbeit macht frei, but the left can't meme. And that is part of the methodology. The broader question is why we have a global far right in such a huge number of different countries, which all arose very much at the same time in history. I think the answer is both the internet and the power of the internet to mobilize and the power of the internet to offer very simple, simplistic solutions. The great merit of far-right propaganda is that it dissolves complexity. It creates a binary world. It also offers other treasures like solidarity. In other words, to understand how the far right, and I'm distinguishing it obviously from the right, actually work, you have to look at the psychological needs it gratifies. So it's going to be with us a very, very long time. The first people to really understand the power of propaganda from a right-wing perspective were the Italian fascists. They invented the model, which Hitler simply plagiarized. But of course, he added dimensions, all of his own. His was the only government in the whole history of the world which used propaganda, not just as a tool of governing, which many states do, but actually as the medium of government. They had a complete army of 20,000 soldiers entirely devoted to propaganda. And that's an entire division that's never existed before in history. The nearest equivalent is actually ISIS, which, according to one soldier, SAS man I know, spent 50% of its budget on propaganda. The Third Reich was very similar. So we're dealing with a global phenomena of amazing complexity, which is propaganda-driven, which offers simple solutions in a very complex, baffling, and confusing world. One obvious manifestation of this is conspiracy theories, which we can talk about because they're a very, very important part of far-right incitement.
Minnie, you don't mince your words in your criticism towards the current ruling government in India,
Yes.
where there has been there has been an exponential rise in the right-wing narrative, both online and offline. The centrist narrative is also gaining ground and popularity in our political discourse today. To what extent do you think centrist ideas act as a check uh, on the power of right wing in this context? And how effective do you think it has been in resisting or moderating right wing narratives?
So I completely agree with Nick when he said that media or propaganda is one of the pillars of fascism. Fascism cannot work without. So I really want to applaud him on that statement he made. Having said that, I believe right wing is a legit political ideology. Let's accept that. It's there in the world, or we call it as conservative politics, or we call it as story or whatever. It is there to stay. When does right wing politics become fascism or bigotry? Like we are facing it world over. You know, the right wing politics is now stepping over into bigotry, into fascism, and that is when the problem starts. The problem starts when the ideology starts discriminating, when the ideology starts picking on people for where they are born and who they are born as. And therein lies the problem for which I am speaking out day in and day out, much to the abuse of my fellow countrymen who keep abusing me day in, day out. I would also like to make this point. I'm a socialist. So if you criticize right wing, then left wing also has to be criticized, because both of them are extreme. Both of them are the other sides of the spectrum. Now, why is left wing more appealing to people and kind of more is because there is no discrimination and bigotry, but the far left is equally worrying. When you have Naxalism or Maoism, it's very worrying. So to answer your question is that yes, this right-wing narrative we see the world over is galloping and has taken over, and I don't think centrism can do anything about it. And I think centrism is a very lazy ism, and most of the centrists are fence sitters and are also opportunists. My opinion about liberalism is again very clouded, because liberalism is a very luxurious ism where you really don't have to do anything. So what leaves that leaves us is that either we have to tilt to a little left of the spectrum, to really call the right wingers out and to stop what they're doing. Because if you see world over, like Nick was saying, they are there everywhere. It's all over the world, and it's just spread like a match, which was ignited. Now, what can we do? For a simple thing is we can't be complicit, because if we are complicit, we are enablers, and therefore I think it is important for us to get off centrism, not to be a centrist, and to choose a cause, and that's the only way we can fight right
wing. We address how significant propaganda is a feature to right wing politics. Danish, how can social cohesion form a debate around right wing politics? And do you think right wing policies and ideologies impact social cohesion within the society?
I think the debate around social cohesion and the debate around right-wing politics, I think it's very central to the idea. Social cohesion is a very central theme to the idea of right-wing politics, because, like Nicholas said, what right-wing actually does for you is to create a very consistent world, is to create a less complicated world for you, a world which otherwise exists largely in a gray zone. It tries to turn things into black and white for you, good and bad, right and wrong for you. But the idea behind social cohesion and nation building is the fact that you need to channelize the energies of your society, your community, and you in a way need to attain national goals by directing those energies towards a certain in a certain channel. How do you do that? You have to make sure there is ample amount of social cohesion. Now, in older times, in ancient times, or even in the medieval times, cohesion revolved around race. It revolved around religion. Over a period of time, we discovered nationalism as that glue for social cohesion and a way to attain national goals, or a way to attain economic goals, legislative goals, whatever, political goals. So I believe social cohesion is extremely important to the idea of right wing, to the theme of right wing politics. And in fact, you personally asked me, I don't believe right wing exists on a continuum of left wing versus right wing. It exists on a continuum where anarchy is on one extreme and right wing is on the other extreme. There's always this tendency to claim that. Hang on. If we have a loosely arranged government, if we have a confederation, if we have a government which doesn't exert itself, which doesn't assert itself amply enough, we are going to go down the path of anarchy. So for me, it is always going to be between anarchy and right wing or conservatism, conservative politics, and therefore. And I think the most important thing to do going forward as civil societies, as civilized societies, would be to find that perfect balance, to strike that fine balance between anarchy and right-wing politics or extremely conservative politics. But when it comes to social cohesion, I think this is something that we cannot possibly do away with, because if national goals are to be achieved, we need to put those we need to bring those energies together. We need to have a way to channelize those energies and make sure they lead us to the right desirable end goals, whether they're political, whether they're legislative, economic, or any. I mean, the thing with right wing politics is today, even in today's India, well educated people will come up to you and say, you know what, you just need dictatorship, and they'll not mince their words. They'll use these words. You need dictatorship for the next 5 years in India to put everything on track. During the emergency, we used to hear a lot about. I mean, history is replete about these statements that trains are running on time these days, offices are running seamlessly, the files are not stopping on any desk, and that's because we have the emergency in place. But what does that do to our democracy? I mean, that is not really the goal of being in a democracy. Democracy in itself is power in a diffused form. It has its complications, it has its problems, but we cannot really have a sort of a government which, at the expense of democracy, we try to attain the national goals, we try to attain our political goals by making sure those energies are channelized and democracy is somewhat put on the back burner in a way.
Thank you, Danish. I wanna take a moment and get back to propaganda, considering it is one of the salient features of right-wing politics today. Professor, coming back to the use of propaganda in the context of the Nazi project, in your book titled Selling Hitler, you vividly explored the topic of propaganda and its use in political communication. In what ways did the Nazi propaganda target different social groups, including the Jewish community, homosexuals, or people with disabilities? And what can we learn from that context to today's political situation in the world?
There's an awful lot we can learn from this period in particular of history, although people often invoke the name of Hitler and Nazis to describe some political actor today whom they disapprove of. It is, in fact, a very unique regime in history. And before I go any further, of course, I should say that it delights the problem in many ways of conservatism. But for conservatives, the far right, can sometimes just seem fraternal people who've just gone a bit too far. They're people we can do a deal with. They're just a bit too super patriotic, but we can civilize them by holding out our hand to them. And this is what Fritz von Papen, who was former Chancellor of Germany, did with Hitler. It's what Hugenberg did with Hitler. Hitler, in other words, was originally part, and briefly, of a coalition government, because German conservatives thought they could do business with him. And the experience of power for the Nazis would actually civilize them, how wrong they were. I suppose the salient factors of Nazi propaganda lie in this, that firstly, they took the idea of market segmentation. They delivered a different message for different groups. They delivered an entirely different message to farmers and to industrial workers, for example. They de-emphasized de-emphasized anti-Semitism in parts of the country which had a different tradition. For example, if you were in parts of the country which were anti-Danish, then you were anti-Dane. You didn't talk about Jews. So there were even instructions in 1932, just before the assumption of power, not to show the swastika very much in middle-class areas, because the middle class got frightened of the swastika. Now, that is an extraordinary thing. I think the other pillar, which is absolutely essential to understand, is the vagueness of message. In other words, they didn't go around saying we're going to exterminate the Jewish population. Much of what they said was deliberately ambiguous. They had phrases like, we don't want high bread prices, we don't want low bread prices, we don't want bread prices to stay the same, we want National Socialist bread prices. And so there was this great nimbus of vagueness to what they actually intended to deliver. The Nazis have even been described as a catch-all party, to the extent that in 1932, they supported the Berlin transport workers' strike, which lost them a lot of votes, lost them about 2 million votes. So they were a party in a nosedive, in decline by the end of 1932. What changed it was a small election in the miniature state of Lippi, I think a by-election as we'd call it, where at the end of 32 they flooded it with their propaganda resources, and they won that state after a period of some months of decline. And it's that which triggered Hindenburg into inviting the Nazis into a coalition government. So you have to look at the precise mechanism by which they got power.
Many in the Indian context, today critics have noted similarities between the RSS's focus on cultural and national identity and that of Nazis' emphasis on Aryan superiority. Do you see a race element in today's right-wing politics in the Indian political discourse? Just for our viewers who don't know what RSS is, it's the ideological parent of India's ruling party, the Bharatiya Janata Party. So do you see some similarities between the Nazis and the RSS's idea of national and cultural identity?
Of course, of course. I mean, RSS very, very heavily took on from all the fascist regimes, and if you notice their cadre, and if you notice some of their policies towards women, the lesser abled, the differently oriented, and they are caste specific. In the Indian context, caste is a very important thing. So they are caste specific. They are also specific from certain regions. So fascism, like I said, if media is one of the pillars, discrimination is the other pillar. You are with your same set of people, and with your same set of people, you try to rule over the rest. And this brings to Danish's point when he was talking about social cohesion towards national goals. In this country, we are so heterogeneous. We are so heterogeneous. We are different from 1 kilometer. Our dialect changes, our tongue changes, the way we look change. So it's a challenge to get there. So what should be binding us is a common national goal, like he said it. But the quote unquote, the cultural wing of the ruling party is so terribly far right, and inspired by Gavalikar himself says, the author of the entire thing, that how inspired he was by the Western fascist leaders, and he has very clear punishments for women who do not conform. he has very clear punishments for certain sect of people. Even if you see today the how do you say, the top cadre of that wing, is all upper caste savarnas. And upper caste savarna is, you can loosely, you can correlate it to the, the blonde, the fair skinned blonde blue eyed boys. So yes, but then to take this one step further, this is there in every fascist. It's a fascist mentality. It's a fascist characteristic. To be with people you choose and to be with people you think will deliver the final message. Because they don't trust women like me and women like you, Aishwarya, or anybody else. So yes, it is very correct to say that RSS takes a lot of it from not only from the Nazi ideology, but from any fascist ideology.
Danish, the world has experienced Nazism in Germany and its fallout. And today it seems like a distant part. Today's world seems more globalized with an increasing number of open societies. Do you think fascism continues to be a real threat to our global society today?
So if you were to believe somebody like James Joyce or Virginia Woolf, they would tell you that the modern age began in the year 1922. And so which makes fascism and Nazism a very modern phenomenon. It is a modern phenomenon. It happened after 1922. And therefore, it isn't something that is lost somewhere in the past. It is very much present in our political DNA in the modern times globally. And therefore, it is always on the horizon. It isn't lost somewhere. It isn't forgotten. Its influences continue to be present in global societies, political systems throughout the world. Now, what are the markers really of fascism or Nazism? The markers, the indicators really are the rise of a cult figure who has the small coterie of people, very closely knit cabinet of sorts, ministers or advisors around him. But by and large, that cult figure remains the top figure, is supposed to be hero worshipped across the country. We saw huge banners of Hitler or Mussolini. So that cult figure creates a system, a political system, which is essentially top heavy, which depends entirely on him, which demands hero worship of that cult figure. Then there's also this tendency. Secondly, there's also this tendency to because fascism exists in the mind. The real sphere of fascism is in the mind, is in the human mind. And therefore, there is a tendency to sort of create an atmosphere which surrounds your electorate completely in all spheres of life, whether it is art, whether it is journalism, cinema, even science. I mean, Nicholas will be able to tell you that a new form of biology sort of was invented during the Nazi times that was centered around eugenics. Likewise, in different parts of the world, there would be tendencies to create new scientific, sort of invent scientific theories or discoveries which borrow heavily from cultural notions or observations, especially in healthcare, because health is something which is very immediate to their electorate. No prizes for guessing where it is happening today in the world. So new sort of health, health-related discoveries, medication, which sort of feed into that mentality, keep influencing the mentality of their electorate. Art, cinema, journalism, so sort of creating a cocoon around the collective mind of the electorate is the second indicator of fascist tendencies. Likewise, there are lots of other indicators which can actually tell us that we have creation of invented enemies, for example, creation of invented enemies within and without. For Nazis, the internal enemies would probably have been the Jews. The external enemies would have been somebody like the communists. So what that does essentially is that it brings people together. It mobilizes the public opinion against that enemy. You are able to project the blame on that particular enemy, and you're able to shrug the responsibility for your own failures. Likewise, there's a tendency to look back into the history, create a glorified past, real or invented. There's this When Trump came on the scene, the slogan was "Make America Great Again," which means it was great at some point of time, and now we're trying to, it is actually referring to a glorious past of the U.S. Likewise, in Nazi Germany, they set out to undo the wrongs of the Versailles Treaty of World War One. So this tendency to look back into the past and sort of create look back into a glorious past, to a past that may or may not have existed. That is another marker of Nazi. Why this is done is because history is something that you can use to justify your present policies, your future policies. It gives you a legitimacy of sorts. So you will always want to bank on your history. You would always want to invent some history if it is not present already. So these are the indicators that are clearly define sort of that sort of show that there are Marxist, there are fascist tendencies present in a political system, and there could be an explosion at any time, or should I call it a meltdown at any point of time. But having said that, I believe we are living in a world which is very different. We are living in a world where power centers are shifting, where the locus of power is shifting away from states to non-state actors like multinationals or transnational organizations, and a world where there's greater migration, there's a lot of people-to-people contact, there's we have globalization, we're living in times of faster communication, faster travel. That somehow, as an optimist, that somehow makes me believe that we can really look forward to a better world. We can really look forward to a world where we can see the better side of human nature rather than regressive fascist sort of nature.
Some right-wing movements have adopted Darwinian ideas to justify their ideology, particularly in terms of social Darwinism and the idea of the survival of the fittest. Does the use of Darwin's theory in political discourse promote a misguided interpretation of evolution? Or Professor, do you think it is a valid way to understand the dynamic of human society?
Well, you raise an absolutely fascinating question. And this is critical to the whole sphere of racialism in the 20th century, the role of pseudoscience. I have to say first about Darwin, that Darwin was in many ways a political liberal. If you look, for example, at the Governor Eyre controversy of the mid-1860s, where Governor Eyre, who astonishingly, because in Australia he'd been a great protector of Aboriginal rights and advocate for them, when there was a rebellion in Jamaica, he had the leadership executed out of hand, and it led to a huge controversy. He was put on trial. And the big literary figures like Tennyson and Dickens supported Governor Eyre. Darwin and Huxley not only opposed Governor Eyre, they actually sued him. They actually pursued him through the courts to get justice to his victims. So what we have is a misunderstanding of Darwinism, the social Darwinism of Herbert Spencer. Actual Darwinism is not about the survival of the fittest. It's about a niching strategy by species. So you get the survival of profoundly unfit species like the sloth. The sloth, you would think, shouldn't survive, but it does, because it has a niching strategy. So this comes really in two forms: the misinterpretation of Darwinism and illicit transfer to social forms, and secondly, the misunderstanding of the work of Friedrich Max Müller, who is professor of Sanskrit in the University of Oxford. And it was he who created this acronym Aryan for the Indo-European linguistic stream. So it was actually an acronym from linguistics, which other people, to Muller's absolute rage, started to apply to race. And so you have this mythical notion of the Aryan race. You have this notion of social Darwinism, specifically vastly influenced Hitler. Hitler saw the world in social Darwinist terms, that there were fitter groups which would survive and other groups which deserved to be downtrodden. This was an illicit understanding of science and a profoundly ignorant one. It has to be said, though, we should never lose sight of the fact that Nazis and fascists are very capable of changing their tune, of jumping onto a bandwagon. For example, the Nazis were the ultimate white nationalists. Hitler called them the Prometheus of the human race. They had to change because only 20% of the world was white. Goebbels stopped the use of the term anti-Semitic in 1938. They wanted allies in the Arab world. And by the beginning of the war, they had to appeal to groups all over the world to the extent that they were actually allies within Imperial Japan. The ideology could absorb this. They made Japanese people honorary Aryans. The Japanese people were a people like the Germans who needed their Lebensraum. And so the great irony of the Nazis is that throughout the length of World War II, it was an interracial alliance in several ways. Firstly, the very close alliance with Imperial Japan, which was a very, very powerful thing. But secondly, they needed to recruit other groups into their army, into the Waffen-SS, which was the fighting SS, which had an entire Muslim division. It had people of every ethnicity in it. There's even a case of an unfortunate Korean man who was forced to join the Japanese army in World War II. He was then captured by the Russians and forced to join the Soviet army. He then was captured by the Germans and was forced to join the German army. And this Korean man in German army uniform was captured by the Allies on D-Day, became a prisoner of war in Britain, emigrated to America, and spent many decades of his long life as a happy American. But what a story to have fought in all the armies of World War II as a Korean. So the ideology was deeply, deeply flexible, but it was driven in the end by pseudoscience, not by science, by a complete misunderstanding of the science, and by an illicit conceptual transfer.
Minnie, in your book, The Lines of Separation, you explore themes of identity, belonging, and human relationships. Thinking about it in today's context, what role does identity play in the rise of right-wing political movements and their appeal to a certain segment of the society?
Right-wing politics mainly and largely works on identities. I think Danish and the good professor has spoken about it very eloquently. And so whenever I write about fractured creatures, fractured women who are tormented because of who they are, where they are born, where they're born to, the geographical area, and who they are born to. So right-wing exploits that element for which we have no control. You are born where you are and you can't control it. I am born where I am and to a place where I can't control it. And that's what right-wing exactly, or the extreme right-wing, they like in India, there are certain communities, there are certain groups, there are certain people who are being targeted. And what are they being targeted about? It's because of their identity. And day in and day out, these particular groups that are tormented are made to realize that it's because of who you are this is happening to you. And it is because, and unfortunately, those identities have no control. They can do nothing about it. So you see, they're so vulnerable. And in a majoritarian country like ours, they are the lowest denominator. And as yet, right-wing politics is always obsessed with large, akhand, chappan, bada, big, super statue, super sizes. And these kind of adjectives are largely used is to minimize and demoralize the already few in numbers. And therefore, I always explore, and I'm fascinated about identity. Whatever I write, it's always about women. She's always at the receiving end of a fascist government. We have seen that in ISIS, we have seen that in Daesh, we have seen that in Nazism. We have seen that even in the British Empire. I mean, we've completely forgot to mention that it was at the Boer War the concentration camps were, made. And somehow the English have managed to obliterate the trend they started. And we only remember fascism as late as, the Hitler times. But it was the English. The English were notorious for what they did. But it is yet, I'm fascinated about the woman because of her minority status, about if she comes from an identity that is targeted by the right wing, that is even more interesting, because she's the one who is persecuted the most. Like case in point is Bilkis Banu. Bilkis Banu is a copybook case about what happened to her, and it's still not over for her. You know what I'm saying? She's living it every day. And we need to be really ashamed of ourselves. I mean, that's all I can say, Aishwaria.
Thank you so much for such insightful arguments and inputs on our subject today. I want to ask the panel, starting with you, Professor, what are the prospects for a reversal of the global shift to the right in the coming years?
Well, I think we have a basic problem in the architecture of democracy itself. In other words, the great book on democracy, or one of the greatest, was de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. He was a French aristocrat who toured America and published this amazing book in the early 1840s. And what he observed is that essentially democracy is the dictatorship of the majority. He said in many ways that tyranny is more easy to resist than the weight of a million men piled onto you in a democracy. That this was the problem with democracy, how it treated its minorities, how it marginalized them, because it was the dictatorship of the majority. And we have to find some way of weaving in minoritarian rights and demands and so forth into the architecture of democracy. Now, that can work. It can work well, it can work badly. For example, if we have proportional representation, that goes to the other extreme. It can actually empower minorities to an extreme degree because they hold the balance of votes. So if you look at Israel today, the problem with the Israeli government is that it's been held in power by two groups, by the settlers and by the extreme Orthodox, the Hasidim. And because of the architecture of proportional representation, Netanyahu was able to build a government out of these both highly extremist groups in different ways. The Hasidim, for example, refused to join the army, and basically they refused to work, etc. I won't go into that. But it's really a difficult thing for democracy, for these solid majorities in general, to actually ignore the grievances of the minority can, in the end, lead to all kinds of civil strife, civil fratricide, rebellion, terrorism. A very good example of that, of course, is the suffrage movement, the movement for votes for women, where in London there were actually a number of Indian women who were very prominent in the suffragette movement. But by the end of the Edwardian period, the suffragette movement was turning to violence. It was turning to terrorism. For example, there's a church I often go to, St. George's, Hanover Square, where a suffragette exploded a bomb in the year 1914 and blew out all the stained glass window. No one was killed or injured. But you see, that is what happens if you don't have inclusivity, you have rejection, you have civil strife. And so I think it goes to the very heart of democracy. And if democracy is tainted with this rise of a far right rather than a conventional kind of conservatism, then we have to be worried. And the global phenomena, you have Duarte, who is in the Philippines, you had Bolsonaro in Brazil, you have Erdogan in Turkey, and so forth. The important thing, I think, to recognize is that this is a transnational and transcultural movement. It's affecting all kinds of superficially different countries, but which have at their heart the same kind of levels of alienation, of identity, wars, and so forth, which we've been discussing about so far.
Thank you so much, Professor. Danish, what are your thoughts on the prospects of the reversal of the global right?
Look, I've already said that I'm an optimist when it comes to believing in the good side of human nature, and but there's also a practical reason for it, because if you understand, like we spoke about social cohesion earlier, if you understand how the mechanics of social cohesion really work, you need to have a sort of a central theme, a glue which binds people together, and that is what fascism or right-wing politics feeds off of. Now, in the earliest times, in ancient and medieval times, it was race and religion that formed that glue. Over a period of time, when the scientific revolution came, when Reformation came, and when the Holy Roman Church was pushed into the background, when we had the Renaissance, scientific thinking, we saw the emergence. We needed another glue. Religion did not really, work as such a potent glue anymore. So we actually discovered another important force called nationalism. If you remember, it came close on heels with industrial revolution, with scientific, thinking. Nationalism acted as that new glue of sorts for societies in Europe. Of course, in our part of the world, we didn't really have coherent nations at that point of time. But after the Westphalian Treaty of 1648, it was, we started to see a greater emergence of nationalism in Europe. So this is not to say that these were well-defined periods in human history. This is not to say that religion was completely eliminated in political discourse. They kept flowing into each other. They kept religion kept informing nationalism, and continues to, in a way. Nationalism sometimes keeps borrowing from religion, even today. Hindu nationalism or Islamic nationalism in Turkey, as you're seeing these days with Erdogan, or a complete state of Pakistan was based on Islamic nationalism. But what do we have in store for the future? What would be the glue really that binds people together? What would be the glue? What would be the source of that social cohesion for humans, which we still need? Let me just reiterate myself. We still need a social glue to achieve national goals. So that social glue could come through humanistic values. It could come through environmentalist values. Climate change is a big challenge that we as a global society are facing today. Why can't it form that new social glue, that can bind people together? We're already living in a globalized world where there's a lot of transmigration of people across the world. Feminism is a movement. It is present, women being present across societies. It can form that new social glue. Justice, equal rights, all of these new movements, especially with the gradual undermining of the state machinery. The state machinery is gradually dwindling. It's in power. It will, in my opinion, you might disagree with me, or the panelists might disagree with me, but the state machinery, the state is actually paving way for the emergence of non-state actors, which are, beginning to become more powerful than the state itself. Territorial realms are not so prevalent. Territorial realms are not maybe so relevant today. I mean, we have social media companies, we have media companies, we have multinational companies that are calling the shots with a lot of government policies these days. Facebook could single-handedly have won the election for Donald Trump by some fine-tuning of their algorithms. So what we are seeing is a world that is transforming. What we are seeing is a world where the locus of power is shifting away from the state towards the non-state actors like multinational companies or other groups. And in that context, I think the new emerging forces are very relevant. The forces of environmentalism, feminism, these could actually form this could actually be the source of new social glue, the source of new social cohesion, in my opinion, and which I believe will sort of be the pinnacle of human achievement in civics, in political science, I believe.
Thank you for that shred of optimism that we all need. Mini, what are your concluding thoughts?
Yes, I'm an optimistic person, so I obviously know that there is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. But how are we going to get there? Is it going to be a very simplistic process, or is it going to be complex? Is it going to be convoluted? Honestly, the silence and the complicity, I'm afraid of it. I'm really frightened of our silence. I'm really frightened of our fear. I'm really frightened that none of us can write anything or make a theater or make a film. Or I strongly believe that change comes with art, cinema, poetry, theater. These are first the catalysts of changes. And even if you see all over the world, I'm a cinema buff, you see cinema being made is very servile. Is again, it just reinforces the state theme, you know. And I believe the change will happen when these, when the Gen Z and the rest, start using these mediums like art to reach out to the common person. I think Manmohan Desai was a major. He did much more for India than anyone else. Even though it sounded very silly, blood from three different individuals being coming to a mother. I think it was an awesome metaphor that stuck with Indians for a very, very long time. We need things like that. So I think arts will drive the change. Music will drive the change. Cinema, theater, and we will get there. I'm very sure about that.
Thank you, Mini. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time and such insightful and wonderful arguments. And I hope we can film again with all three of you all.
Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Aishwaria.
I hope we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much. Thank you, Danish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for watching our conversation. Our channel, Geopolitics and Diplomacy, aims to provide a deep understanding of the power struggles, alliances, conflicts, and negotiations that define modern geopolitics and diplomacy. We believe that understanding the complexities of international relations is essential for building a more peaceful, prosperous, and sustainable world. I hope you enjoy our channel, like and subscribe it as we continue featuring expert analysis and commentary from leading academics, policymakers, and thought leaders of the world. Thank you.